Hello and welcome. Settle in now. Find that perfect position where your body feels heavy and your mind begins to quiet. Let the ambient warmth of the room, real or imagined, seep into your bones. The sound you hear is the gentle crackle and pop of a fire, a steady, comforting rhythm to accompany our journey tonight. A soft golden light flickers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, creating a safe and tranquil space just for you. As you breathe in, imagine the faint, pleasant scent of wood smoke. As you breathe out, release the tensions of the day. Let your shoulders fall, your jaw unclench, and your thoughts begin to slow, swirling like lazy embers rising from the hearth. Tonight we are not here for shocks or for scares. We are here for a story, a true story, one that is woven into the fabric of history, a mystery that has lingered for decades, like the ghost of a whispered secret. It is a story of immense beauty and audacious theft, of silence and shadows, of priceless treasures that vanished into the night. We will explore it slowly, deliberately, allowing the details to unfold at a pace that is both captivating and profoundly calming. This is a story to carry you toward the edge of sleep, a fascinating puzzle to occupy the mind, just enough to keep it from wandering, guiding it gently down a path to rest. So, close your eyes if you haven't already. Listen to the fire. Listen to my voice, and let us travel back in time to a city draped in celebration, on the cusp of a crime that would become legend. Our story begins in Boston, Massachusetts. The year is 1990. The date is Saturday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Imagine the city. Boston is a place steeped in history, its cobblestone streets and brick-lined avenues echoing with the footfalls of centuries. On this particular night, it is a city awash in green. The pubs and bars of the Back Bay and South Boston are overflowing with revelers. Laughter and music spill out onto the streets, carried on a cool, damp March wind. The air is thick with a joyous, chaotic energy. It's a night of forgetting worries, of celebrating heritage, of being lost in a crowd. But away from the boisterous epicenters of celebration, there are pockets of quiet. On the Fenway, a grand and ornate building stands in stony silence, its back turned to the city's festive roar. It is a Venetian-style palace, a transportive piece of architecture that seems plucked from another time and place and set down in modern America. This is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and it is here, in the profound quiet of this palace of art, that our story is centered. To understand the crime, you must first understand the place. The Gardner Museum is not like other museums. It is not a sterile, white-walled gallery. It preserved exactly as its creator intended. That creator was Isabella Stewart Gardner, a woman as unique and captivating as the collection she amassed. Born in 1842, a wealthy New York family, she was a true eccentric, a patron of the arts who lived life on her own terms. She was known to walk a pet lion down the street, to wear a headband emblazoned with "Oh, you Hottentot" to the symphony, and to defy the stuffy conventions of Boston's high society at every turn. When her beloved husband, Jack Gardner, passed away, Isabella dedicated herself to their shared dream, building a museum to house their vast and growing art collection. She purchased land in the marshy, undeveloped Fenway area and oversaw every single detail of the construction of her palace, which she named Fenway Court. She wanted it to be a place that would stimulate the senses, a place for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. But she had rules. In her will she left a very specific and legally binding decree. The collection had to be maintained precisely as she had left it. Nothing could be moved, sold, or even rearranged in the permanent galleries. If her terms were violated, the entire collection was to be auctioned off in Paris, and the proceeds given to Harvard University. And so, for decades, the museum remained her perfect frozen vision. It is a labyrinth of intimacy and grandeur. At its heart lies a breathtaking, glass-roofed courtyard, filled with an ever-changing display of flowering plants and ancient sculptures. Even on a cold March night, you can almost imagine the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. From this central courtyard, 3 floors of galleries radiate outwards, each with its own distinct character. The rooms are dimly lit, filled with a deliberate and eclectic mix of masterpieces and personal trinkets. A priceless Titian might hang over a simple wooden table. A rare manuscript might rest near a dried flower from a friend's garden. The arrangement is personal, idiosyncratic, and deeply human. It feels as though Mrs. Gardner herself has just stepped out of the room. This was the sanctity, the frozen-in-time perfection that was about to be shattered. Let us now turn our attention to the inhabitants of the museum on this specific night. As the St. Patrick's Day celebrations outside reached their peak and began to wane, only 2 souls were tasked with guarding this immense treasure, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. 2 young night watchmen, the first and the one at the center of our story's beginning, was a 23-year-old man named Rick Abath. Abath was not a career security guard. He was, like many young men his age, drifting a bit. He was a musician, a guitarist and singer in a local rock band called Ukiah. He had dropped out of the Berkeley College of Music. The night watchman job at the Gardner was just that, a job. A quiet, low-paying gig that allowed him to work on his music during the long, silent hours. He was known to be a bit of a slacker, a bit of a rebel. He would sometimes show up for his shift in no condition to work, and had a reputation for occasionally leaving the security desk to wander the dark, hallowed halls of the museum, something that was strictly against the rules. He was, by all accounts, an unreliable guardian for a priceless hoard. His partner for the shift was named Randy Hest. He was the newer of the 2, having only been on the job for a short time. The security at the Gardner, in retrospect, seems astonishingly lax. There was no video surveillance system that recorded footage. The cameras were merely closed circuit, feeding a live image to monitors at the security desk. The motion detectors were old, and the guards were known to sometimes turn them off in certain galleries to avoid false alarms triggered by flapping banners or temperature changes. The only connection to the outside world was a single red button, a panic button, connected directly to the Boston Police Department. The entire security of this $500 million collection rested on the shoulders of two young men. Their training and that one red button dot. As midnight approached, the city outside began to quiet down. The last of the revelers stumbled home. A light mist hung in the air. Inside the museum, the shift change had occurred. Rickabath was now at the main security desk, a small station located in the new wing of the museum, near the side entrance. On Palace Road, Randy Heston was conducting his patrol. The routine was simple. One guard would patrol the vast, echoing galleries of the old building, a 2-hour round, while the other monitored the screens at the desk. Then they would switch. The silence inside the museum was profound, a stark contrast to the noise of the city just hours before. It was a silence filled with the weight of history, the ghosts of patrons past, and the silent, watchful eyes of the figures in the paintings. Let's pause for a moment and consider those paintings. In the Dutch room, on the second floor, hung the crown jewels of the collection. This room was a dark, wood-paneled chamber, a treasure box of 17th century masterpieces. On one wall was a painting of breathtaking rarity and beauty, The Concert by Johannes Vermeer. There are only about 36 known Vermeer paintings in the entire world. This was one of them. It depicts two women and a man playing music in a sun-dappled room. It is a scene of serene, domestic harmony, a quiet moment of beauty captured with the artist's signature mastery of light. Its value was, and is, considered incalculable. Hanging near the Vermeer was the only seascape ever painted by Rembrandt, Bun Rain, the storm on the Sea of Galilee. It is a work of immense drama and emotion. A small fishing boat is tossed on a furious sea, the disciples struggling against the waves while a serene Christ calms the storm. Rembrandt painted himself into the scene, one of the disciples looking directly out at the viewer, his hand on his cap, his face a mask of desperation. The painting is a whirlwind of light and shadow, divine power and human terror. It was a centerpiece, a masterwork of the highest order. Beneath it hung another, smaller Rembrandt, a self-portrait etching, no bigger than a postage stamp, a tiny, intimate glimpse of the master himself. And on the opposite wall, a landscape by Gevert Flink, who was once one of Rembrandt's most promising pupils. The Dutch room was, in essence, a shrine to the Dutch Golden Age, and tonight it sat in vulnerable silence. Back at the security desk, the minutes ticked by. Midnight came and went. It was now officially March 18th. The city slept. The mist thickened. According to the museum's motion detector logs, which would later be scrutinized by investigators, Randy Heston, the second guard, completed his patrol. Of the galleries around 12:30 a.m., he returned to the desk, and the two guards settled in for the long, quiet hours ahead. Then, at approximately 1:24 in the morning, a new element entered the scene. A small red car, possibly a Dodge Daytona, pulled up near the museum's side entrance on Palace Road. It parked. Two figures emerged. They were dressed in what appeared to be official Boston police uniforms. They were tall, well-built men. They approached the steel door of the side entrance, the only entrance used after hours. They pressed the buzzer dot inside at the security desk. The buzz cut through the silence. Rick Abath looked at the monitor connected to the camera outside the door. He saw the two men. They wore police hats and long coats. One of them had a thick, fake-looking mustache. It was this detail that would later be endlessly debated. Was it obviously fake, or only in retrospect? One of the men spoke into the intercom. His voice was calm, official. "Boston Police," he said. "We got a report of a disturbance in the courtyard. Now, here is the first critical moment, the first breach of a carefully laid protocol. Museum policy was absolute on this point. No one, under any circumstances, was to be admitted into the museum after it was closed. Not police, not fire, not even the museum director himself, without a rigorous chain of approval. Abath's job was to call his supervisor or the police department directly to verify the claim. He was not to open the door, but Rick Abath was 23. The men on his screen looked like police officers. They were talking about a disturbance in the courtyard, a place that was a known spot for teenagers to try and sneak into. It seemed plausible. Perhaps he was intimidated. Perhaps he was tired. Or perhaps, as some theories would later suggest, he was expecting them. Whatever the reason, Rick Abath made a fateful decision. He broke protocol. He buzzed them in the heavy steel. Door clicked open. The two men stepped inside, into the museum's sterile entryway. They walked towards the security desk where Abath was sitting. As they approached, Abath could see them more clearly. They looked official enough. He likely felt a mix of apprehension, undeference. These were authority figures. One of the officers approached the desk. He looked at Abath. "You look familiar," the officer said. "I think we have a warrant out for your arrest. Can you step out from behind the desk?" Another moment of decision. Another protocol to be broken. The security desk was a fortified position. The guard was never to leave it when strangers were present. The panic button was within arm's reach. But again, Abath complied. He stood up and stepped away from the desk, away from the only link to help. The instant he was clear of the desk, the demeanor of the two men changed. The pretense of authority vanished, replaced by cold, swift command. One of the men turned to Abath and said, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery." He ordered Abath to call his partner, Randy Heston, down to the desk. Abath, now realizing the grave reality of the situation, did as he was told. When Heston arrived, he too was swiftly apprehended. There was no struggle, no violence, just the chilling efficiency of two men who were completely in control. The thieves were prepared. They produced handcuffs. They cuffed Rick Abath. Then they turned to Randy Heston. They asked him where he was on his patrol route. When Heston told them, one of the thieves remarked, "You're not the guy we're looking for." They led him away from a bath, cuffed him as well, and then, in a move that would also be endlessly analyzed, they wrapped his head and face with duct tape. Curiously, they did not do this to a bath. The thieves led the two bound and powerless guards away from the main part of the museum. They did not take them to a nearby closet or office. They led them on a long walk down into the museum's basement. The basement was a dark, sprawling space, a maze of pipes and storage rooms. They took them to a utility area, far from the security desk, far from any possible way of being heard. There, they secured Rickabath to a steam pipe and Randy Heston to a workbench about 40 yards apart from each other. They used the duct tape to bind their hands, feet, and eyes more securely. The tape was wrapped so tightly around Abbot's head that he would later say he could feel his hair being pulled from his scalp. The thieves checked their bonds. They were thorough. The guards were not going anywhere. One of the last things that thieves said to the guards was, "Don't tell anyone about this, and you'll get a reward in about a year." A strange, almost taunting promise, and then they were gone. They left the two young men alone in the cold, damp darkness of the basement. The only sounds were the hum of the building's machinery, the drip of a distant pipe, and the sound of their own frantic heartbeat. Above them, the magnificent palace of art, the life's work of Isabella Stewart Gardner, with all its priceless, irreplaceable treasures, was now empty, silent, and completely at their mercy. They had the run of the place. The guards were neutralized. The police were not coming, because no alarm had been tripped. The thieves had at least an hour and a half before the next shift was scheduled to arrive and discover what had happened. They had time. Imagine the scene now. The thieves walking back up from the basement, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. They emerge back into the main building. The air is still. The faint light from the city outside filters through the tall windows. They are surrounded by masterpieces. They are standing in one of the most significant private art collections in the world, completely and utterly alone. The greatest art heist in modern history was about to begin. Let's retrace their steps. First, they returned to the security desk. They knew something about the museum's systems. They took the videotapes from the VCRs that recorded the feed from the security cameras, ensuring there would be no visual record of their presence inside. They also ripped the printout from the motion detector system, the paper trail that recorded which parts of the museum had been entered and when. This showed a level of sophistication. They weren't just smashing and grabbing. They were covering their tracks. With the security systems effectively blinded, they began their work. Where to start? With a collection so vast, their choices would be telling. They did not wander aimlessly. They seemed to have a shopping list. They bypassed entire galleries filled with priceless Italian Renaissance paintings, works by Raphael and Botticelli. Instead, they made their way directly up to the second floor, to the dark, wood-paneled Dutch room. This is where the heart of the collection was, and it was here they would do their most devastating work. Imagine them entering the room. The air is cool and still. The only sound is their own breathing, perhaps the rustle of their clothing. They are standing before Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. The painting is huge, over 5 feet tall. It is bolted directly to the wall. The thieves are not delicate. They are brutal. They take a sharp blade, a knife or a box cutter, and they slice the canvas directly out of its frame. They cut it away from its stretcher bars, a horrifying act of desecration to any art lover. The sound of the canvas ripping would have been a sharp, violent tear in the profound silence. They rolled it up, a masterpiece of human emotion and divine power, now just a loose piece of fabric. They turned to the wall opposite. There hung Gavert Flink's landscape with an obelisk. They did the same to this painting, cutting it crudely from its frame. And then they turned to the concert. It was much smaller, more intimate. They didn't cut this one. They simply smashed the glass of its frame and removed it whole. The sound of shattering glass, another sharp intrusion into the quiet. They were not finished in the Dutch room. They also took the small postage stamp-sized self-portrait by Rembrandt, but they seemed to have trouble removing it from its frame. In their frustration, they left the frame on a nearby chair and took only the tiny etching. Then, a perplexing choice. On the wall was another major Rembrandt portrait, one of his most famous self-portraits from his later years, showing the artist aged and weary. It was perhaps the most valuable single painting in the room. They tried to remove it from the wall, but for some reason they failed or gave up. They left it untouched. Why? Was it too difficult to remove? Did they run out of time? Or was it simply not on their list? This question remains one of the most baffling parts of the crime. From the Dutch room, their path becomes even more curious. They moved into the adjacent short gallery. It's a long, narrow room, more of a hallway, filled with drawings and smaller objects. Here, they meticulously unscrewed and opened the cases containing 5 drawings by the French artist Edgar Degas, sketches of racehorses and jockeys. They also took a small bronze eagle finial, which had once sat atop a flagpole bearing a silk flag of Napoleon's Imperial Guard. The flag itself, a far more valuable and historically significant object, they left behind, lying on the floor. Another strange choice. What was the significance of the eagle? Their final stop was on the ground floor, in the blue room. Here, they took a single painting, Edouard Manes, Chez Tortoni. It's a small, lively painting of a gentleman sitting at a cafe table, a snapshot of modern Parisian life. It was one of the few impressionist works in Isabella's largely Renaissance and Dutch collection. Why this one? And then, perhaps, the most bizarre theft of all. From a table in the same room, they took an ancient Chinese bronze beaker, a gu from the Shang dynasty, dating back to 1200 BC. It was a beautiful and historically significant artifact, but its value was a fraction of the Renaissance masterpieces they had ignored in other rooms. The total haul was 13 objects. The time was now approximately 2:45 a.m. The thieves had been inside the museum for 81 minutes, an eternity for a heist. They had been methodical, yet their choices were erratic. They took a priceless Vermeer and a relatively low-value eagle finial. They cut Rembrandts from their frames, but left an even more valuable one behind. They stole an ancient Chinese beaker, but ignored a Raphael. Their work was done. They gathered their rolled-up canvases and smaller stolen objects. They likely made 2 trips to their car, loading the priceless, brutalized art into the trunk or back seat. Before they left, they did one last check. They returned to the security desk and spoke briefly to the 2 guards, still bound and helpless, in the basement, telling them again not to worry, that they'd hear from them in a year. Then they walked out the side door on Palace Road, closing it behind them. They got into their red car and drove off into the pre-dawn darkness of Boston, disappearing with a haul of art estimated to be worth, at the time, $200 million. Today, that value is placed at over 500 million, and by many accounts is considered priceless and simply irreplaceable. Inside the museum, a new kind of silence descended. It was no longer the peaceful, reverent silence of a sleeping palace of art. It was a violated silence, a wounded silence. On the walls of the Dutch room, empty frames now hung like open wounds, stark, gilded rectangles surrounding nothing but faded wallpaper where masterpieces had once lived. Shards of glass littered the floor beneath the space where the Vermeer had been. The Napoleonic flag lay discarded. The museum, for the first time since Isabella Stewart Gardner had arranged it, was broken. Her will had been violated, and in the basement, 2 young men remained tied up in the darkness, waiting. Their initial terror had likely subsided into a grim, uncomfortable reality. They could only wait for the morning shift to arrive, to discover the scene, to raise the alarm. They had hours to sit with their thoughts, with the knowledge of what had happened on their watch, hours to contemplate. The moment the buzzer rang, the decision to open the door, and the swift, terrifying realization that they had let the wolves into the fold. The great city of Boston slept on, unaware that it had just become the victim of the single largest property theft in history. The treasures were gone. The thieves had vanished, and the greatest art mystery of our time had just been born. We will pause our story here, in the echoing silence of the violated museum, with the thieves melting back into the fabric of the sleeping city. The fire continues to crackle, its steady sound a comfort in the darkness. Let the details of the night settle in your mind. The festive city outside, the quiet palace within, the 2 young guards, the 2 mysterious thieves, the priceless art now gone. Let these images drift without tension, without anxiety. They are simply pieces of a story, a puzzle we will continue to explore. For now, just listen to the fire. Feel the warmth. Let your breathing be slow and deep. Rest. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the sound of the crackling fire anchor you in this moment of quiet. The embers glow and shift, a steady, living presence in the room. The story is waiting. We left our narrative in the cold, pre-dawn hours of March 18th, 1990. The greatest art thieves in history had vanished into the Boston night, leaving behind a wounded museum and 2 young men bound in the dark. Now, we watch as the sun begins to rise, and the world slowly awakens to the silent devastation. The first hint of dawn is a delicate thing in a city. It's not a grand explosion of color, but a gradual softening of the darkness. The deep, inky black of the sky gives way to a bruised purple, then a hazy, industrial gray. On the morning of Sunday, March 18th, this quiet transformation was happening all over Boston. Streetlights, which had held dominion over the empty streets all night, began to look pale and unnecessary. The first delivery trucks rumbled through the quiet avenues. The city was stirring, stretching, preparing for a new day, entirely oblivious to the violation that had occurred in its cultural heart. Inside the Gardner Museum, time had moved at a different pace. For Rick, Abath, and Randy Heston, tied up in the pitch-black basement, the hours had crawled by in a state of discomfort, fear, and disbelief. They were cold. Their limbs were numb. The duct tape was a suffocating, constricting presence. They could only listen to the monotonous hums and drips of the building's hidden life, each minute stretching into an eternity of helpless waiting. Above them, the galleries remained shrouded in a profound and unnatural silence. The arrival of the morning shift was their only hope. As 7 a.m. approached, the first of the day guards arrived for his shift. He went to the employee entrance, the same door on Palace Road that the thieves had used, and found it locked. This was not unusual. He buzzed, expecting one of the night guards to let him in. He received no answer. He buzzed again. Still only silence. A flicker of annoyance, perhaps, but not yet alarmed. He walked around to the main entrance, thinking maybe the intercom was broken. He tried calling the security desk on his walkie-talkie. Again, nothing. Now, a seed of concern began to sprout. This was a breach of protocol. The night guards were supposed to be reachable at all times. More day staff began to arrive, gathering outside, confused. They called the museum's director, of security, a man named Lyle Grindle. Awakened at home, Grindle was irritated. He assumed his notoriously unreliable night watchman, Rick Abath, had likely overslept or simply walked off the job. He drove to the museum, a sense of mounting frustration growing with every red light he hit. When Grindle arrived, he used his own keys to finally open the doors. He stepped inside, expecting to find the security station empty, a dereliction of duty. But what he found was far more unsettling. The desk was empty, yes, but there were signs of a disturbance. Papers were scattered. And then he saw it, a pair of handcuffs lying on the floor. In that instant, frustration curdled into a cold, hard knot of fear. This wasn't a case of a lazy employee. Something was terribly wrong. Grindle, now accompanied by other guards, began a frantic search of the building. They called out the names of the 2 night watchmen, Rick, Randy. Their voices echoed through the hallowed, empty halls, swallowed by the cavernous space. They moved through the ground floor galleries, their footsteps quick and loud on the stone floors. It was in the blue room that they first saw the evidence of the theft, the empty space on the wall where the Manet Chez Tortoni should have been, a blank spot screaming its absence. Their search grew more urgent. They moved upstairs, their dread mounting with every step. They entered the second-floor Dutch room, and there, the full, breathtaking horror of the night revealed itself. They were met with a scene of pure desecration. Two massive, ornate frames on the wall were starkly, violently empty. The raw, jagged edges of the cut canvases were still visible inside the gilded borders. The floor was littered with shattered glass from the frame that had held the Vermeer. A chair was pulled out into the middle of the room, evidence of the thieves' work. It was a crime scene of unimaginable scales. The heart of Isabella's collection had been ripped out. It was only then, amidst the shock of discovering the stolen art, that they heard it. A faint, muffled noise coming from far below, a sound of life. They followed the noise down into the labyrinthine basement, and there, in the cold, damp air, they found them. Rick, Abath, and Randy Heston, still bound to the pipe and the workbench. They were alive, but they were shaken, cold, and disoriented. They were finally cut free around 8:15 a.m., nearly 7 hours after they had been tied up. As their eyes, accustomed to utter blackness, adjusted to the light, their story came tumbling out a confusing, terrifying account of two men dressed as police officers of a reported disturbance, of handcuffs and duct tape. The call to the Boston police was made immediately. "It's the Gardner Museum," the voice on the line must have said, filled with a dawning, incredulous panic. "We've been robbed." Within minutes, the quiet Sunday morning at the museum was shattered. The first patrol cars arrived, their sirens wailing, a sound that seemed to violate the sanctity of the Fenway neighborhood. They were soon followed by detectives, and then, recognizing the unprecedented scale of the crime, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Gardner Museum was officially sealed. Yellow police tape was stretched across its grand entrances, a stark, modern intrusion on the 15th century Venetian facade. The Palace of Art was now a federal crime scene. Imagine being one of those first investigators to walk through the doors. You step from the chaos of the flashing lights and crackling radios outside into a space of profound, wounded silence. The air inside is cool and still, carrying the faint museum smell of old wood, dust, and linseed oil. But now there's a new scent, the sharp, metallic tang of crime. You are walking through the personal, preserved dream of a long-dead woman, and it has been defiled. The FBI's art crime team, a specialized unit accustomed to dealing with stolen paintings and forged sculptures, took the lead. But even for them, this was something different. This wasn't a single painting snatched from a gallery wall. This was a 13-piece, $500 million heist. It was audacious, brazen, and, in its own strange way, elegant in its execution. The lead agent, a man named Dan Falzon, found himself at the helm of what would become the most complex and frustrating investigation of his career. The first order of business was to process the scene. Forensic teams swept through the museum, dusting for fingerprints, looking for fibers, hairs, footprints, tiny, stray piece of evidence the thieves might have left behind. They moved with a slow, deliberate reverence, acutely aware that they were treading on sacred ground. They found the duct tape rolls the thieves had used and discarded. They found the shattered glass. They collected the handcuffs. But the thieves had been careful. They wore gloves. Finding a usable fingerprint would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The investigators walked the path the thieves had taken, trying to get inside their heads. Up the main staircase to the Dutch room. The sight of those empty frames was chilling. They hung like hollow eyes, silently testifying to the violence that had occurred. Investigators noted what was taken, but just as importantly, what was left behind. The priceless Raphael in the Titian room, untouched. The Botticellis, ignored. And most tantalizingly, the Rembrandt self-portrait in the Dutch room, the one they had apparently tried and failed to take. Why did they get spooked? Did an alarm finally sound that only they could hear? Or was their tool not up to the task of removing its fasteners? It was a maddening clue that led nowhere. They followed the thieves' path to the short gallery, noting the neatly removed Degas drawings and the stolen eagle finial. They looked at the massive Napoleonic flag left lying on the floor, a treasure worth far more than the finial that had crowned it. It made no sense from a financial perspective. Was the finial a souvenir, a personal trophy for one of the thieves? The questions piled up, forming a dense fog of uncertainty. And then there were the guards. Rick Abath and Randy Heston were not just victims. They were the only witnesses. They were taken to FBI headquarters and interviewed for hours. Their stories were picked apart, examined from every angle. They described the two men, white in their 30s, one about 5 feet 10 inches with a fake-looking mustache, the other taller, over 6 feet. They recounted the ruse about the disturbance, the warrant for Abath's arrest. Immediately, Rick Abath fell under a cloud of suspicion. His actions were, to put it mildly, a catastrophic failure to follow procedure. He let the men in. He stepped away from the panic button. These were cardinal sins for a security guard. Investigators couldn't help but wonder, was he simply incompetent and easily fooled? Or was he a willing participant? Was this an inside job? The theory was compelling. Abath was a young musician in a rock band, making minimum wage. The temptation of a cut from a multi-million-dollar heist would be immense. There were other troubling details. Why was Randy Heston, the other guard, the only one whose head was completely wrapped in duct tape? The thieves had told Heston, "You're not the guy we're looking for." Was Abath the guy? And then there was the motion detector data. The printout had been ripped from the machine, but the data was still stored in the computer's memory. When the FBI technicians finally recovered it, they found something strange. In the hours leading up to the robbery, the log showed that the side door on Palace Road, the very door the thieves used, had been opened and closed shortly after midnight, more than an hour before the supposed police officers arrived. Abath was the only one at the desk at that time. When questioned, he claimed he couldn't remember why he might have opened the door, perhaps stepping outside for a moment, but it looked suspicious. Furthermore, the motion detectors in the Titian room, where the priceless Raphael hung, had gone off around the same time. Abath claimed it was a false alarm, that he had gone to check and found nothing. Was he telling the truth? Or was he conducting a late-night tour for his accomplices, showing them the layout, pointing out the prizes? The pressure on Abath was immense. He was just a 23-year-old kid who wanted to play guitar. And now he was at the center of the biggest art theft in world history, viewed by many as a prime suspect. For years, the FBI would keep a close watch on him, hoping for a slip-up, a sudden, unexplained windfall of cash, a whispered confession to a friend, but it never came. He maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a young, foolish kid who made a terrible mistake under pressure. The question of his involvement would linger for decades, a shadow that never quite dissipated, while the inside job theory was tantalizing. It didn't explain the professionalism of the thieves. These weren't amateurs. They came prepared with handcuffs, duct tape, and police uniforms. They knew how to bypass the security systems. They seemed to know exactly which rooms to hit. This level of planning pointed away from a flaky rock musician and towards a much more dangerous world. Boston's organized crime scene, in 1990. Boston was a city with a deeply entrenched and violent criminal underworld. It was a landscape dominated by two major forces: the traditional Italian-American mafia, La Cosa Nostra, based in the city's north end, and the notoriously ruthless Irish mob, run out of South Boston by the infamous James Whitey Bulger. The FBI began to look at the heist through this lens. This was the kind of high-stakes, higher-reward crime that would appeal to seasoned mobsters. Investigators started floating the idea that the art wasn't stolen to be sold on the open market. You can't just put a Vermeer on eBay. These paintings were too famous. They were, in a sense, worthless because they could never be sold publicly. The value of such a heist for a criminal organization lay elsewhere. Perhaps the paintings were to be used as a get-out-of-jail-free Carter bargaining chip, to be traded with the government in exchange for leniency for a high-ranking mob boss facing a life sentence. Or perhaps they were stolen to be used as collateral in international drug or arms deals, a universally understood symbol of immense value, a kind of criminal currency. One of the first names to surface was a notorious Boston art thief and mob associate named Miles Connor Jr. Connor was a brilliant, charismatic, and audacious criminal, a real-life Thomas Crown. He was a rockandroller, an expert in art history, and had a long history of stealing valuable objects, including a Rembrandt from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston years earlier. He even once told investigators that he had cased the Gardner Museum for a potential robbery in the 1980s. The problem for the FBI was that, on the night of the Gardner heist, Miles Connor Jr. was sitting in a federal prison cell. But that didn't rule him out entirely. Could he have masterminded the robbery from behind bars? Did he provide the know-how, the shopping list, to associates on the outside? When questioned, Connor claimed he knew who did it. He suggested the paintings were taken by a crew and moved to a secret location, and that he could broker there, return in exchange for his own freedom. It was a tempting offer, but was it a genuine lead or just the clever manipulation of a master con man trying to play the system? The FBI was wary. They had been down this road with Connor before. Another line of inquiry led the FBI to a faction of La Cosa Nostra, operating out of a garage in Dorchester, run by a capo named Carmelo Milano. The Milano crew was a rough-and-tumble group of criminals involved in drug trafficking and robberies. They weren't known for their subtlety or their appreciation of 17th century Dutch masters, but they were connected, and in the murky Boston underworld, connections were everything. Informants began to whisper that members of the Molino crew had been talking about the heist, boasting about their involvement. One Lollival hoodlum, a man named Robert Bobby the Cook Gentile, was said to have had possession of at least one of the paintings years after the theft. His house would be searched decades later, turning up a list of the stolen art and its estimated value, but no paintings. The investigation became a slow, painstaking process of cultivating informants, of listening to jailhouse gossip, of trying two separate truths from bravado in a world where everyone had an angle. The thieves had vanished so completely that it was as if they had been ghosts. No credible sightings of the art had ever emerged. No ransom note was ever received. The strange promise the thieves made to the guards, "You'll get a reward in about a year," came and went with no communication. The trail was growing colder with every passing day. Meanwhile, the city of Boston and the art world at large were reeling. The news of the theft was a global sensation. It was a story that combined so many compelling elements: priceless art, bumbling guards, brazen thieves, pow, and a fairy tale setting. The museum, a place of quiet contemplation, was suddenly thrust into the harsh glare of the international spotlight. The director, Anne Hawley, became the public face of the tragedy. She had to navigate the storm of media attention while dealing with the profound sense of loss that permeated the institution. In the days following the robbery, a crucial decision was made. Isabella Stewart Gardner's will was explicit. If any part of the permanent collection was moved, the entire museum was to be dissolved. Technically, the thieves had moved the art. Was this the end of the Gardner Museum? Lawyers debated the issue, but the spirit of the will was clearly intended to prevent the museum's trustees from selling or rearranging the art, not to punish the institution for being the victim of a crime. The museum would remain. And so, Anne Hawley made a powerful and poignant choice. She ordered that the empty frames of the stolen masterpieces be put back on the walls. It was a gesture of both mourning and hope. The empty frames would serve as a constant, tangible reminder of what was lost, placeholders for the art's eventual return. To this day, if you visit the Dutch room at the Gardner Museum, you will see them. The grand gilded frame of Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee hangs empty, a hollow rectangle against the dark fabric of the wall. The smaller, more intimate frame for Vermeer's The Concert also holds nothing but a space of memory. They are ghosts on the wall, a silent, enduring plea for the art's homecoming. They transform the rooms from simple galleries into memorials, spaces of perpetual longing. As the initial weeks turned into months, the investigation settled into a long, frustrating grind. The world's most valuable missing property had seemingly evaporated from the face of the earth. The thieves had achieved a near-perfect crime. They had left behind 1,000 questions, and not a single solid answer. Who were they? Were they sophisticated art connoisseurs or common thugs? Were they working for a reclusive billionaire, a powerful mob boss, or for themselves? And the most haunting question of all, where was the art? Was it hidden in a climate-controlled vault somewhere in Europe or Asia? Was it buried in the basement of a New England home? Or had it been tragically destroyed, damaged beyond repair by the crude way it was handled, or discarded by panicked thieves when the heat became too intense? No one knew. The trail had gone cold, and a deep, quiet dread began to set in that the paintings might never be seen again. Let's rest here for now. The investigation has begun, but it is already mired in mystery and speculation. The threads of inquiry lead into the dark corners of the Boston underworld and into the troubled mind of a young security guard. The empty frames hang on the museum walls, a testament to an absence that feels almost like a presence. Let your own mind drift on these possibilities, these unanswered questions. There is no need to solve the puzzle. Simply observe its fascinating, complex shape. Feel the gentle heat from the fire. Listen to its steady, rhythmic crackle. Allow the story to fade into the background as you focus on your own comfort, your own slow journey into rest. The mystery can wait. The fire before you continues its soft and steady dance. Let its warmth and its gentle, crackling song be your focus. Breathe in and feel the calm spread through you. Breathe out and let go of any lingering thoughts. We return to our story, a mystery that has deepened with the passing of time, a void that has become a legend. The thieves have vanished. The investigation has begun, and the world is left to wonder. Years are patient things. They pass without fanfare, layering one upon the other like fine sheets of dust settling in a quiet room. For the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and for the investigators tasked with solving its impossible robbery. The years after 1990 moved with a slow, grinding persistence. The initial storm of media attention, the frantic scramble for leads, the daily press briefings, all of it gradually subsided, leaving behind a profound and echoing quiet. The case did not close. It simply grew cold, like an abandoned hearth. The mystery, once a blazing fire of public fascination, cooled into glowing, stubborn embers, tended by a dedicated few who refused to let it die out completely. The 1990s were a decade of deep frustration for the FBI. The investigation, which had begun with such intensity, became a long, slow hunt for whispers and shadows. Pay gents followed countless dead-end leads, chasing down supposed sightings of the art in Japan, South America, and across Europe. They interviewed hundreds of people, art collectors, career criminals, jilted lovers of mobsters, anyone who might have heard a stray word in a bar or a boastful confession in a moment of weakness. Each lead promised a breakthrough, a crack in the wall of silence, but each one ultimately dissolved into mist. A mirage in the vast desert of the unknown. The cloud of suspicion never fully lifted from Rickabath, the young security guard who had opened the door. Though never charged, he lived a life defined by that one fateful night. He left the world of security and museums behind, moving away from Boston, trying to build a new life. But the Gardner heist was a ghost that followed him. He would forever be the guard from the Gardner, the man who held the key and gave it away. In interviews given decades later, he would appear as a man weary of the story, tired of the speculation, forever trapped in the amber of that one terrible decision made when he was 23 years old. Whether he was a victim of his own naivete or a cunning accomplice, his life was irrevocably changed, a quiet casualty of the crime. Meanwhile, at the museum, life found a new, altered rhythm. The empty frames remained on the walls of the Dutch room, a constant, silent vigil. They became as much a part of the Gardner experience as the Titians and the Raphael. Visitors would stand before them, their faces reflecting in the empty space where a masterpiece once hung. They would gaze at the jagged, cut edges of the canvas still caught in Rembrandt's frame, a visceral reminder of the violence of the act. The frames were a statement of defiance, a symbol of hope. But as the years wore on, they also became monuments to a loss that felt increasingly permanent. In 1997, on the 7th anniversary of the theft, the museum took a significant step. They doubled the reward for the return of the art, raising it from $1 million to $5 million. It was a staggering sum, a clear signal to the world and to whoever was holding the art that their primary goal was not justice, but recovery. They wanted the art back. No questions asked about the initial theft. The announcement made headlines again, a brief flare-up of interest in the cooling case. The museum and the FBI hoped the money would be enough to tempt someone, to loosen a tongue, to break an old loyalty. But the silence that answered their offer was as profound and complete as ever. The art remained lost. The thieves, or their keepers, were not moved by money. They wanted something else, or perhaps they wanted nothing at all. As the 20th century turned into the 21st, a new generation of investigators took over the case file. The original agents retired, passing on boxes filled with old reports, interview transcripts, and fruitless leads. One of these new agents was a determined FBI man named Jeffrey Kelly. For him, the Gardner case wasn't just another file. It became an obsession, a personal quest. He inherited the ghosts of the investigation, the phantoms of Miles Connor Jr., the whispers about the Merlino crew, the endless puzzle of Rick Abath. He re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined old evidence, hoping that the passage of time might have changed things, that old allegiances might have frayed, that someone nearing the end of their life might finally be ready to unburden their soul. And slowly, painstakingly, a thread began to emerge from the tangled knot of the Boston underworld. It was a thread that led back to a name that had surfaced early on. The Merlino crew, the gang of mobsters run by the Capo Carmelo. Merlino out of a Dorchester garage. An informant had told the FBI years before that shortly after the robbery, he had seen one of Merlino's top enforcers, a man named David Turner, in possession of the stolen Napoleonic eagle, Finial. The informant claimed Turner had boasted about the heist, but at the time, it was just one of many underworld whispers. Now, years later, the FBI decided to put pressure on the aging Merlino crew. In 1999, the FBI arrested Carmelo Merlino, David Turner, and another associate for an unrelated armored car robbery plot, facing long prison sentences. The agents hoped one of them would be willing to trade information about the Gardner art for a lighter sentence. The focus zeroed in on Carmelo Merlino. In prison, he allegedly told another inmate that he knew where the art was. He claimed he could get it back, but he wanted the $5 million reward and his freedom. It was a tantalizing offer, but was it real? The FBI arranged a series of recorded conversations between Merlino and a confidential informant. They listened as Merlino spoke cryptically about the paintings, suggesting he and his crew had tried to ransom them back in the early 90s, but the deal had fallen through. He spoke of recovering the art, but his stories were vague, shifting, full pride of the bravado of an old-time gangster. He seemed to be playing a game, trying to see what he could get without ever revealing anything concrete. The FBI's hope began to fade. Merlino was either bluffing, or he was too scared of the consequences of revealing the art's location. In 2005, Carmelo Merlino died in prison, taking whatever secrets he held about the Gardner heist to his grave. Another door had closed, but the Merlino connection had opened up another, even more promising path. It led away from the tough streets of Boston to a quiet suburban town in Connecticut. It led to an unassuming, elderly man named Robert Bobby Gentile. Gentile was a low-level mobster, a made man in the Philadelphia family, but he had connections to the Merlino crew in Boston. He was not a man who projected power. He was aging in poor health and lived in a cluttered house with his wife. He seemed an unlikely keeper of a $500 million secret. The lead came from an impeccable source, the widow of another mob associate, a man named Robert Guarente. Guarente had also been part of the Merlino circle. After his death in 2004, his widow went to the FBI. She told them that before her husband died, He had admitted his involvement in the Gardner robbery. She claimed that her husband had been in possession of some of the stolen paintings, and that sometime around 2002, he had given 2 of them to his old friend, Bobby Gentile, for safekeeping during a meeting in a parking lot in Maine. This was the most concrete that the FBI had had in over 2 decades. In 2012, armed with a search warrant, federal agents descended on the quiet Connecticut home of Robert Gentile. They conducted a meticulous search of his property. Imagine the scene. FBI agents in blue jackets, carefully picking through the accumulated clutter of an old man's life piles of old newspapers, knickknacks, dusty boxes in the basement hall, in search of a Rembrandt or a Vermeer. They did not find the paintings, but they found things that were deeply suspicious in the basement, hidden beneath a false floor. They found a copy of the Boston Herald from March 1990, the day the robbery was announced. Tucked inside the newspaper was a handwritten list of the 13 stolen artworks, along with their estimated black market values. They also found a police-style cap and police scanner, items that echoed the thieves' disguises. And in the backyard, buried in a shed, they found an empty picture frame. Gentile was arrested on unrelated drug and gun charges, and the FBI put the squeeze on him. They believed he was their man, the key to unlocking the entire mystery. They offered him deals, threatened him with long prison sentences. They even had him take a polygraph test. When asked if he currently had the paintings, he answered no, and the test indicated he was telling the truth. But when asked if he had ever had the paintings, or if he knew where they were, the results were inconclusive. Bobby Gentile became a fascinating and frustrating figure in the Gardner saga. He was a cantankerous old man who insisted he knew nothing. He claimed the list of stolen art belonged to his dead friend, Guarente. He played a cat-and-mouse game with the FBI for years, sometimes hinting he might know something, at other times angrily denying everything. He complained about his health, about the FBI ruining his life. Was he a master manipulator, enjoying the spotlight in his final years? Or was he truly just a clueless old man, caught in the web of his friend's past deeds? The FBI searched his property again, even using ground-penetrating radar to look for signs of buried canvases. They found nothing. In 2021, Robert Gentile died, just like Carmelo Merlino, maintaining his silence to the very end. The Connecticut connection, which had seemed so promising, had grown cold. Just as the Gentile lead was developing, the FBI made a landmark announcement. In March 2013, on the 23rd anniversary of the heist, the Bureau held a major press conference in Boston. For the first time, they stated publicly and with confidence that they had solved a major piece of the puzzle. They announced that they knew the identities of the thieves. They described them as members of a criminal organization with a base in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. They confirmed that the thieves were no longer alive. The 2 men who walked into the museum dressed as cops, who had tied up the guards and cut the Rembrandts from their frames, were dead. The announcement was a bombshell. It shifted the entire focus of the investigation. The question was no longer who did it, but had now become, with a new and desperate urgency, where did the art go? The FBI believed the paintings were taken from Boston to Connecticut and Philadelphia in the years following the crime. They said that in the early 2000s, there was an attempt to sell some of the paintings in Philadelphia. After that failed sale, the trail went cold once again. The FBI did not release the names of the deceased thieves, hoping to protect their ongoing investigation into the art's whereabouts. But investigative journalists, piecing together sources, banned leaks, soon named the likely culprits, George Reisfelder and Leonard DeMuzier, two associates of the Carmelo Merlino crew. Both men fit the general physical descriptions given by the guards. Both had died within a year of the robbery, which might explain why the promised reward for the guards never materialized. The theory was that they had stolen the art for the Merlino organization, but their untimely deaths had complicated the plan, leaving the art in a state of criminal limbo, passed from one nervous associate to another. This new information painted a clearer, though still incomplete, picture. The heist was not the work of sophisticated international art connoisseur. It was likely the work of a local mob crew, common criminals who saw the art not for its beauty, but for its value as a high-stakes bargaining chip. They had pulled off the heist of a lifetime, but they seemed to have no idea what to do with their loot. The very fame that made the painting so valuable also made them impossible to sell, a paradox that had trapped the art in the underworld for decades. And so, the story comes to the present day. More than 3 decades have passed. The Gardner Museum, in a final, desperate plea, has increased the reward to a staggering $10 million for information leading directly to the recovery of the art in good condition. They have also offered a separate $1,100,000 reward for the return of the stolen Napoleonic eagle finial alone. The statute of limitations for the crime of theft ran out long ago. Whoever has the art cannot be prosecuted for the initial robbery. The museum and the FBI have made it clear. They just want the art back. They are pleading with a ghost, a whisper in the criminal underworld, hoping that $10 million is finally enough to make someone break their silence. But the silence holds. The 13 artworks remain missing. Their fate is the subject of endless, quiet speculation. Where could they be? Perhaps they are in the hands of a reclusive, private collector, a modern-day Bond villain who admires them in a secret, climate-controlled vault, their beauty visible to only one pair of eyes. Or perhaps they are still rolled up, hidden away, in the attic or basement of a gangster's relative, their custodians too afraid to come forward, too unaware of their true cultural significance. It's possible they were passed down to a younger generation that has no idea what these old, rolled-up canvases even are. And then there is the most heartbreaking possibility of all, that the art has been destroyed, that the crude methods of the thieves licing the canvases, rolling them up caused irreparable damage, that years of improper storage in a damp basement or a hot attic have caused the delicate paint to flake and peel away, rendering the masterpieces worthless. Poor that at some point a panicked holder, feeling the law closing in, simply destroyed them, burning them, sinking them in a river, choosing to erase the problem forever, rather than risk being caught with it. This is the great fear that haunts the investigators and the art world, that the search is not for a lost treasure, but for a ghost. The story of the Gardner heist has no ending, and perhaps that is why it remains so deeply captivating. It is a perfect, unsolved mystery. It lives on, not in a dusty case file, but in our collective imagination. It has become a piece of modern folklore, a tale of ghosts and treasures, of audacity and loss. The empty frames still hang on the walls of the Gardner Museum. They are no longer just symbols of hope. They are part of the art now. They are frames around an absence, forcing us to contemplate not only what is there, but what is not. They invite us to fill the void with our own imagination, to picture the serene faces in Vermeer's The Concert, to feel the spray from Rembrandt's Furious Sea. The theft gave the paintings a new, tragic story, and their absence has given them a strange and powerful new life. And so we leave the story here, suspended in that quiet, unresolved space. There is no final chapter, no dramatic recovery, no satisfying conclusion. There is only the enduring mystery, the silent frames, and the faint crackling sound of a fire in a quiet room. Let the questions of the story dissolve. Who took the art? Where is it now? These are not questions for you to answer tonight. They are simply ripples on a still pond, gently moving outwards and then disappearing. Let your mind be as still as band. Focus only on the sound of the fire, a steady, ancient comfort. Feel the weight of your body, heavy and relaxed. Feel the warmth of your blankets. The story is over. The night is quiet, and it is time for you to rest. Breathe in, pren, and let go. Breathe out and drift. Sleep now. Sleep.